I am not a scientist. I am a lawyer who does represent scientists, including on these issues. I represented the skeptic scientists in our Supreme Court case on this issue, among others, and work on policy as well. Now, though this is off topic a little bit, I like to begin, particularly because I speak on campus quite a lot, with this image. Now, I live on what's called the Constitution Trail, where all of our founding fathers spent their time during that formative stage, Washington, Madison, Jefferson. And we're very familiar with that history, though we often forget it. For example, while I usually have to tell students first who that man standing in the boat is, the second point is, what's all that white stuff in the water? Because rivers do not freeze over anymore. But they did used to, of course. We all know about the Thames. It caused a man who lived right over the hill from me to write, "Snows are less frequent and less deep. They do not often lie below the mountains more than 1, 2, or 3 days, and very rarely a week. They are remembered to have been formerly frequent, deep, and of long continuance. The elderly inform me the earth used to be covered with snow about 3 months in every year, and they walked to and from school uphill both ways in it. The rivers, which then seldom failed to freeze over, scarcely ever do so now." Now that, of course, is Thomas Jefferson. Notes on the state of Virginia, 1781. He's not talking about climate change. He's talking about global, well, warming. But he also wrote about his friends on the continent here, telling him of a warming at a rate of 1 degree per century by Mr. Fahrenheit's thermometer. Now, he was not using this to drive an agenda. He was not invested in solar energy. So he really didn't have a reason other than to take notes and record events. Now, in fact, this is the original, which you can find on the University of Virginia's website, the same school we have to sue to try to get Michael Mann's emails. Now, flash forward to today. This is an interview by the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer, of a large electric utility, the largest coal-burning utility in America, American Electric Power. And in the interview with Forbes magazine, he said, "Of course we're behind the global warming industry. We'll make a fortune off of this." The same thing was said by the chief executive of our largest nuclear power provider. For different reasons, he said, "Of course we're behind this industry. We'll make a fortune off of it." He said, "We treat lobbying like a capital expense. Because we won't have any additional capital expenses under this scheme, we just get to charge more for our stuff." So, it was inevitable. Like every ism of the past century, it was inevitable, we were told. But something happened along the way. That was ClimateGate. ClimateGate caused right after lunch, I apologize, but ClimateGate caused a rethink and a dramatic change in science and politics, even if many in the media chose to ignore it. In science, we finally settled that settled thing. For example, a longtime spokesperson for the movement, Dr. Judith Curry, who heads the School of Atmospheric Sciences at Georgia Tech University, came out with a post-ClimateGate open letter. No one really believes the science is settled or the debate is over. Now, for 15 years, when some of us said that, we were told, well, you believe the moon landing was faked too, don't you? And now it's nobody believes that. So that was refreshing. Scientists and others that say this seem to want to advance a particular agenda. Non-Jeffersonian. There's nothing more detrimental to public trust than such statements, which you may tell individuals, journalists, or university professors who insist on saying, or politicians maybe, "It's settled, nothing to see here, must move on." Ask them, when was it settled? Better yet, what settled it? Was it a paper, a zinger in a debate, a newspaper article? What was it? Well, we know it's not settled anymore. Now, in the United States, politicians also took note. The former pollster for President Clinton, named Stanley Greenberg, conducted a poll, and he said, "Don't say global warming anymore. Don't say cap and trade. They're not falling for it." But here's what my poll shows me. Bring your legislation back in and reissue it and call it the clean energy economy or green jobs, but no longer global warming or cap and trade. Well, that worked. This is not an environment bill, said Senator John Kerry, the lead author of the cap and trade climate bill. He canceled his press conference, which was scheduled for Earth Day, purely by coincidence. And when asked, why did you cancel your press conference to announce your cap and trade bill, he told the press two things. Don't call it cap and trade because I don't know what that means. And then he said, this is not an environment bill. Now, it amends the Clean Air Act. It grants authority to the Environmental Protection Agency. It does mention the environment 97 times, climate 220 times, greenhouse 650 more times. But it's not an environment bill. My pollster told me so. But he's actually right. This is a model projection of EPA, our Environmental Protection Agency's model. It goes by an acronym, M-A-G-I-C-C, MAGIC. This is their model showing you that the temperature after cap and trade would be whatever the temperature would have been without it. So you can believe it's about the climate. It might be to you. But that's not a reasonable conclusion because nothing ever proposed, Kyoto or anything, would detectably impact the climate, according to the models that are used as the basis, of course. But this has long been known. After the United States went to Kyoto and agreed to Kyoto, despite a unanimous Senate telling the administration not to, and that is in the Constitution, Article 2, Section 2, advice and consent. We did sign Kyoto too, by the way, on November 12th, 1998. We never unsigned it. That was just sort of the media way to grossly oversimplify the story. That mean George Bush. Bush could no more sign the Kyoto Treaty than he could sign the Treaty of Versailles. Somebody already signed it. We never unsigned it. Tom Wigley advised Al Gore when he came back from agreeing to Kyoto. Gore asked two people two things. What would it do? What would it cost? This was the answer to what it would do. And Tom Wigley published it in a paper. He said nothing. After 100 years, if perfectly implemented, pause, wait for laughter, Kyoto, not by selling ration coupons, but by reducing emissions, would reduce temperatures an undetectable 0.15 degrees Celsius. It would do nothing. All pain, no gain. But now we're told, oh no, no pain. We will all be millionaires from selling windmills to each other. But wait. At the time Kyoto was agreed, actually 1 week later, Science Magazine published an editorial or a paper saying, well, okay, I know we sold this as salvation, but in fact it's the first of 30 treaties. Then, early this year, Kyoto deal loses 4 big nations. Russia, China, Japan, and Canada all said no to a second phase. So the first one's not going all that well. The idea of a second is a non-starter. And so what happened? Well, the pollster told them, and they reissued that cap and trade climate legislation, same bill, was pulled back, and they reissued it after canceling the Earth Day press conference, and it was called the Kerry Lieberman American Power Act. American power. Good. Where's climate? Well, that's in the bill, as with cap and trade and environment. So this is how you see we got to the clean energy economy agenda in the US, but I suspect it wasn't all that different here. The president got the memo. After the cap and trade legislation was defeated, that is, it was decided, the Democrat-controlled Senate said, we will not vote on this. It was killed. In the United States, the president, at a press conference, said there are other ways to skin the cat. Well, Al Gore got very mad with President Obama, and he started saying that he was being unpresidential by being insufficiently alarmist on global warming. In his defense, a former head of the EPA told a newspaper called Politico, with Congress unlikely to push climate legislation anytime soon, Obama may not talk about climate change so much, but he will backdoor it through clean energy.
We will move forward with investments to transform our energy economy while providing incentives to make clean energy the profitable kind of energy. But to create more of these clean energy jobs, we need more production, more efficiency, more incentives. It means passing a comprehensive energy and climate bill with incentives that will finally make clean energy the profitable kind of energy in America. But to truly transform our economy, to protect our security and save our planet from the ravages of climate change, we need to ultimately make clean, renewable energy the profitable kind of energy.
That was very deliberate wording. 3 speeches, exact same phraseology each time. His first 2 State of the Union speeches and his first speech to the United Nations. Make it the profitable kind of energy. Can the state make something that doesn't work? No. Can it make it efficient? No. Can it make it economic in any normal sense of the term? No. Can it make it profitable? That we can do by making that which works so uneconomic and by trying to subsidize the unprofitable. You can make it profitable. This was one of the talking points that a quick history of the issue reveals. On net, it's proven to kill jobs everywhere. For example, the president gave 8 speeches saying, look at Spain, that's my model. He no longer gives that speech. It costs jobs on net. It costs jobs on net in Scotland, according to an academic paper, Denmark, Japan, Italy 4.8 jobs, and so on. This exposes the global warming industry's talking points, and it is a global warming industry, which I'll address in a moment. New technology. Wind-powered electricity was invented in back in 88, commercialized. 1888. Solar-powered electricity was commercialized in 1891. Coal-fired electricity was commercialized back in 1883. So they're actually contemporaries, just like the first cars were electric cars. You can't now make it work by calling it new or nascent or saying, well, we just need a chance to compete. It has failed for more than a century. And then they say, isn't it time we began investing in this? As you'll see, that's a rather absurd talking point. And of course now, even industry supports it. I'm told, for example, even Wall Street supports it. What could possibly go wrong? Well, of course they do. When you rob Peter to pay Paul, you are guaranteed Paul's enthusiastic support. And that's what's going on here. This is a popular cartoon strip in America called Dilbert. And in it, Dilbert says, or the dog says to Dilbert, I'm writing fake press releases for imaginary new green energy technologies. Dilbert asks, now how will I know which green breakthroughs are real? And the dog says, seriously? You think there are real ones? This is a Wall Street Journal headline from 1978. Solar power seen meeting 20% of needs by 2000. Carter may seek outlay boost. And then I'm told, isn't it time we began investing in these things? How can I begin investing in something that's been subsidized for so long that Jimmy Carter gave it a boost? And right now it's 0.2%. That's close for 20%, I suppose. You may have seen recent headlines where this is fairly typical what happens when 20% by 2000 fails, why they say 25% by 2025, and so on. Then came the smartest guys in the room, and this was my introduction to the issue. Kyoto was exactly what we've been lobbying for. This agreement will be good for Enron stock, 2 exclamation marks. This is an actual memo to Ken Lay, the then CEO of Enron, from his full-time global warming staffer in 1997, December 1997. Now you can find this along with his briefing memo for his Oval Office meeting with Sir John Brown, Bill Clinton, and Al Gore on August 4th, 1997, where they told him, ignore the Senate and agree to that treaty because we need cap and trade domestically. We have a clean energy economy in mind and a green job scheme. But in this memo, and it was sent from Kyoto, Japan, and it's a what I did in Kyoto memo. I got Kyoto like we've been asking for. He also said this, and it is very revealing. If implemented, this agreement will do more to promote Enron's business than will almost any other regulatory initiative. That's the business plan. Almost any other regulatory initiative. I was director of federal government relations for Enron for 3 weeks when this was going on. I sent an email asking questions, raising some objections. They didn't like it, and I left after 3 weeks. This was in early 1997, when they had me working with BP, the gas interests, Union of Concerned Scientists, and others to get a global warming treaty get the US involved, get a domestic cap and trade scheme, and so on. This was the business plan, and for 2 years I was wandering the streets of Washington talking about this evil company who had all these schemes of making money doing nothing. Any other regulatory initiative, their business plan was to lobby into place regulatory initiatives. When you rob Peter to pay Paul, you are guaranteed Paul's support. Sometimes the entire idea was Paul's to begin with. And then the second line in this memo, Enron has now excellent credentials with many green interests, and it named them. Several of them are European Climate Action Network and so on, World Wildlife Foundation, Greenpeace. This should be increasingly cultivated and capitalized upon, in parentheses and misspelled, monetized. So, another Far Side cartoon, this is really what it's about. At the bottom, you've got two spiders who have spun a web at the base of a playground slide, and one of them says to the other, if we pull this off, we'll eat like kings. But it does require being pulled off. These are industries that would not exist but for the governmental policies. Well, what's wrong with this, I'm asked? Remember, the industries don't exist because of reasons of economics or performance. They exist solely because politicians waved a wand, and in the United States we say, well, okay, so maybe we don't use these things or make these things, but we should. Therefore, I'm going to require it. Well, you find problems there. Winners are chosen not for their performance, their economics, or so on, but because of politics. And you're finding, for example, the winners are picked for political considerations. That is inescapable. That is why you may have heard of our stimulus package, about $1 trillion, thrown at stimulating the economy. A lot of it, 90+ billion, went to green jobs. But it didn't stimulate jobs, of course, but it did stimulate scandals. Because when you don't exist because of your economics or your performance, who do you think gets the money? Brothers-in-law of the former Speaker of the House, sons of members of Congress, who either are on the board or hired as lobbyists, and so on. It's a universe populated with what are known as cronies, because you didn't get picked on the merits. The rewarded companies all made the same pitch to the White House. Unless you give us this bag of money, we will not exist. Now, the proper response to them is then, don't exist. But instead, the inescapable is unspoken, but we now know proven. Of course, even if you do give me this bag of money, I still won't exist once I burn through it. I'm uneconomic. That's the argument. It's been proven time and again. And you'll see the examples that we're finding, and they will continue. It's a system that therefore doesn't tolerate political corruption. It almost insists upon it. Now, this is notable because it's from a left-of-center publication that made a big deal out of it. It was from 2 weeks ago, Newsweek magazine. Obama campaign backers and bundlers, that is people who raise a lot of money and package it together and give to the campaign, got the green grants and loans. Now, the author says, after he was sworn in as president, Obama proclaimed that taxpayer money would assuredly not be doled out to political friends. Quote, decisions about how stimulus dollars are spent will be based on the merits, he said, referring to the recovery bill. Let me repeat, decisions about how recovery money will be spent will be based on the merits. They will not be made as a way of doing favors for lobbyists. But exactly that is what we have found to be the case. For example, if you look at the big program that gave away most of the money, you'll see that 10% of the applicants were deemed worthy. So a very small number of the applicants, but a very large number of that 10% turned out to be cronies. People with campaign connections. For example, at least 10 members of Obama's finance committee and more than a dozen of his campaign bundlers were big winners in getting the taxpayer money. At the same time, politicians got the same 16.4 billion of the 20.5 billion. Okay, so 3/4 of the money went to companies that were either run by or primarily owned by his financial backers, people who were bundlers, members of his finance committee, or large donors to his political party. Because again, you need to expect this. Winners are not chosen on the merits, despite the rhetoric. Inherently, when these industries only exist because of politics, the winners will be the politically connected. It is not rocket science. You may have heard of this company. I made up a nice logo there with his, called Solyndra. This was called by the administration their poster child. They got $530 million, more than $500 million, to build a facility they didn't need to build, but it was in the congressional district of a member of Congress who the president really needed to get his health care bill through, the guy who wrote the tax provisions. So the company went bankrupt, and very soon. And what we learned from the administration was, according to their figures, these stimulus jobs, temporary jobs created by this legislation taking money from the economy and putting it to unproductive uses, cost $250,000 per temporary job. You don't make that up in volume, but it can get worse. The green jobs cost $355,555 per temporary job, and the Solyndra jobs cost $479,000 per job. They were all temporary jobs, just as was found in Spain with their program. 9 out of 10 were installation jobs. Green jobs are phony jobs which need support to exist for very good reasons. They're not economic. So you should expect corruption and you should expect collapse. And guess what we have found since Solyndra? And by the way, it's not specific to us. I'm talking about industries that don't exist, but for the state saying they should. Here we see an FBI agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation, taking Solyndra documents away from someone's home. Emails exposed show that they were expressing concerns about the Washington Post asking questions. Hey, that paper's our friend. And some of the emails showed that the administration needed to be careful because a lot of political scandal was about to occur. We're going to, quote, get caught up in political scandal as these companies begin going under. And they did, as you shall see. Okay, Solyndra, not the only stimulus company to go bankrupt. As of this article 2.5 months ago, at least 4 other companies receiving this money filed for bankruptcy. And remember, they just got the money. A congressional investigator said more solar bankruptcies were to come, and indeed it happened. Another stimulus solar company went bankrupt, and remember, they just got the money. And then more, it wasn't just solar. An electric car battery maker facing financial hardship, suddenly being reviewed. It was a stimulus baby. They came to the White House and said, unless you give us this money, we will not exist. We're not economic. Another solar power company, and yet another. So, the question is, how could this end any other way? I want you to read the 2 key criteria for giving the money to companies. First, they had to prove that they were a commercially viable project. Second, they had to prove that they could not get private financing. Now, I don't know if you know any of these products, but they all managed to get private financing without the government saying, we need the pet rock to exist. I know people don't buy them, but they should. We need the Snuggie and the ShamWow, by the way, which we're told came from Germany. All of these managed to find financing in the capital markets without going to the government and saying, unless you give me this money, I won't exist. And yet these solar panel companies, like street performance artists, are saying, you need to create a fund, or I won't exist, then don't exist. So there should be no surprises in this. They all made the same pitch. They omitted, even if you do give me this money, I'm still going to not exist once I burn through it. Once again, I'm not economic. You wanted a ribbon cutting ceremony to say, look at me, I did something, I created jobs, I need to show that, well, I got some money and then I went bankrupt. And generally we found they then moved to China if they continue to exist. They only exist solely due to political choice. They depend on more money or another scheme, because you can say, but in Germany we have some solar companies. In Germany you have something we don't have, a national renewable energy requirement. That's the other thing propping them up. You also require things like feed-in tariffs and subsidizing the companies, but you also have a mandate that we use it. You use it. That's what they were counting on here. These are losers, yes, but we're going to get that cap and trade legislation, and that will at least mandate people use the stuff. But we didn't get it because the president's own party killed it in the Senate. So expect more of the same. Here's the New York Times of all places. Future of solar and wind power may hinge on federal aid. That's the understatement of the century. Wind and solar face uncertain future. These are these are industry supporting publications. They face an uncertain future as federal incentives near expiration. The American Wind Energy Association issues a press release every 3 years saying when the wind production tax credit expires, our industry will disappear. Thank you. That's all we needed to know. I'm a welfare case, they're saying. Of all times, we need, at least at home, to consider cutting the welfare. More, Vestas says it will lay off American workers if the US subsidy expires. And this Doubting Industries president says the company can't survive without extending their subsidy. Every industry gets a subsidy of some sort. I support none of them. However, not every industry requires them in order to exist. These people's argument is, I require this to exist, then don't exist. Well, we're told the price is coming down, the price is coming down. Don't confuse price and cost. The cost isn't really going down, but a little bit. But the price is, partly due to the subsidies. But First Solar, which is a stimulus company, their chief executive gave an earnings call to investors a few weeks ago, and here's what he said. Why are the solar panels prices going down? Well, two causes. China saw that Western politicians were mandating them, so they made a lot of them. And we will never outcompete China when it comes to producing commodities. You buy the cheapest one. And then this is from the CEO's earnings call. Declining subsidy pool was the reason. Shrinking subsidy programs. European countries reducing their subsidies. No significant new state-level solar programs, subsidies. Moving downward in terms of subsidies. A much lower subsidy level. Solar industries are feeding mostly off of legacy old subsidies in California. This is one man from one earnings call explaining why his industry was suffering. As we've proven, I believe it's level ground, they only exist because of these favors from friends in government. I want to ask a question, because there's a comedian in America, he's a writer, named P.J. O'Rourke. I heard him give a talk in Brussels, of all places, in February, in which he made a very good point that I'll end with on this. Name something that doesn't create jobs. I can wait all day, but you can't. Every hobby, every program, every vice, every tsunami, every hurricane. As O'Rourke said, shooting convenience store clerks creates jobs, and in the inner cities where they're most desperately needed. If you have to say, but it will create jobs for the workers, it's not an argument, it's an admission that you don't have any arguments. So, and they said, we're compiling all this debt to pay back with interest. In short, none of the proffered reasons withstand scrutiny. So what is it all about? Well, it's not about climate. Remember, nothing ever proposed would detectably impact the climate. So I agree with the computer models. It's not about the climate. It's not about creating net jobs. It hasn't anywhere. Our president used to say, look at Spain, look at Spain. Now he says, look at China. I'll take China's deal. Europe is paying China to install windmills, but not hook them up, because that's expensive and disruptive. But Europe needs the credits under Kyoto. They're making solar panels to sell to vain Western countries who have this folly. Okay, we'll do that too, but no mandate and so on. China's not actually a model. It's not about finding new energy. If you like, I can show you the same people who for decades, someone mentioned Jeremy Rifkin last night. Jeremy Rifkin, Paul Ehrlich, Amory Lovins, Andrew Revkin of the New York Times. For decades, they've been saying the worst thing that could befall humanity is if we discovered a cheap, clean-burning, reliable source of energy. And now the same people are saying, we must make the stuff that works really expensive because, well, you're greedy, you'll figure it out, and we will invent a source of abundant, cheap, reliable, clean-burning energy, which for decades they've said is the worst thing that could ever happen. So which time are you telling the truth? So it's not about that, and by the way, wind and solar are not new, any more than coal is. It's got to be about something, and I go back to Friedman here, but then I'll quote the other team. Milton Friedman wrote that a major source of objection to a free economy is precisely that it gives people what they want instead of what a particular group thinks they ought to want. Underlying most arguments against the free market is a lack of belief in freedom itself. But let's not just listen to Mr. Friedman. There was a man named Van Jones who the White House says on their website is a green jobs visionary. He was fired for proving to be a little bit of an extreme case on some issues, but he said the slogan, it's a slogan you see, the slogan of green jobs is the banner under which all the pro-democracy forces can gather for the next big assaults. This is a German contribution to the effort. Ottmar Edenhofer, the head of the IPCC Working Group 3, the Green Jobs section. One has to free oneself from the illusion that climate policy is environmental policy. Pace, Senator Kerry. No, instead, climate change policy is about how, quote, we redistribute de facto the world's wealth. Now, I have 1 million of them. In fact, I put them in this book. Unless they're all Not really moments of candor or advocacy, but they're all slips of the tongue. Unless all of these people saying it's not about the climate, it's about redistributing wealth. Unless they all are lying, and I have to be given a good reason to believe they all are. As Mr. Alinsky, Saul Alinsky, who was a famous political organizer in the United States, said, the issue isn't the issue. The issue is a vehicle. It's something to ride to reach one's objective. It's an excuse. Now, I pointed this out in a talk that The Nation magazine, which is a long-standing left-wing magazine in America, just wrote an article decrying that I dare point that out. The rest of the article went on to say, you bet the issue isn't the issue. This is what we need for social change, and this is the vehicle to ride. Their point was, okay, the issue isn't the issue. It's just not fair for other people to point that out. But I think it's our job to point that out.